to the Fit and Healthy Today show, and today our subject is on Parkinson's disease. This is kind of a complex subject, so bear with me, but I want you to understand what it is, what causes it, and the supplements and diet that you can utilize to help reduce the symptoms and actually prevent the disease as well. Defined, I've written the definition here because this is a lot of words, but basically what it is a progressive, deadly, degenerative disease of the basal ganglia, which is a compact cluster of neurons in the brain. And what we see basically is within this structure are these little neurons and neurotransmitters that release dopamine. Now, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that's responsible for mood, memory, lots of things, energy. It's a very, very important hormone that we have within our body. So what happens is with Parkinson's is these degenerate with time, and the ability of these neurons to communicate does not take place. They literally die off. And then the dopamine levels fall, and then you end up with the symptoms of tremors, or you get a real heavy arms and legs. Now what I've done here is I've written the symptoms in a progressive manner as you would normally see it. And it can take anywhere from 5 to 15 years to progress if left kind of untreated and not addressed. If we can catch it in the early stages, then our time factors are much more elongated. But tremors or rigid, heavy feeling, and then people may only tremor for just like 5 minutes and then stop and maybe for a week or so not. And then it progresses to further on to speech issues. You know, the memory just doesn't flow as well. You get the tremors. You'll see him kind of shaking like that. If you've ever seen Michael J. Fox, he has more advanced Parkinson's where literally he cannot stay still and he has no control over his motor skills. Although he still seems to be able to manage his speech. They'll end up with a stooped posture because nerve-wise their muscle tissues just can't control themselves. Their expressions sometimes on their facial expressions will almost be like drooling-like because once again, in order to control all those, you have to have facial nervous system working, and obviously when you have a die-off of these particular neurons, it's problematic. And then obviously in its most advanced cases, then we lose most of the voluntary and semi-voluntary movements. Now, looking at the causes, and I am a true believer that this is preventable. And one of the best cases that illustrates this is we have 3 counties here in California that use 1/4 of all of the pesticides in all of the United States. I think it was 250 million tons of pesticides. And in those 3 counties, we have substantially greater incidence of Parkinson's disorder. So when we talk about Parkinson's, I think we're talking, and we've seen substantial rise in this disorder as we've gotten more non-environmentally friendly, more chemical pesticides, toxins. We're just not aware, or we may be aware, but we're eating and ingesting all of these chemicals. High fructose corn syrup, herbicides that you're spraying around to get rid of your little grass that's going in between your concrete. These are all major contributors to not just Parkinson's, but to all nervous disorders. They are also with hormone disrupting as well too, but they get in the brain and they store obviously too in the fatty tissues of the body. So the more fatty tissues that you hold, the more you're going to store these toxins in your body, which increases the likelihood of Parkinson's, neuralgia, and other nervous disorders and hormonal disruption. Excessive serum cortisol. So those high stress kind of people who produce a lot of cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and they'll be stressed all the time. I'm kind of in that category. But what happens is if they don't exercise or they don't find ways to get rid of this excessive cortisol, it causes damage to the neurons and actually to the vascular system as well. So we're finding high stress. Reduced dopamine levels, medications, drugs. There's some pharmaceutical drugs out there that will tank dopamine levels. Just tank them. And mind you, dopamine is necessary for a lot of other things besides motor control. Oxidative damage. People who eat the fast food diet, they have a lot of free radicals, not just chemicals, but free radicals because their foods have no nutritional value. So if you're eating junk, You know, just like my grandma used to say, garbage in, garbage out. That's exactly the response you're going to get. They cause oxidative damage, which literally causes you to rust inside your body. So, inflammation, heavy metals, particularly if you're involved in, you know, machinists or people who have been exposed to heavy metals. Dentists with mercury exposures. I know that the Dental Association says otherwise, but that is considered a toxic chemical. But they have people in those lines of work where they're exposed to heavy metals will experience nerve damage, period, which can also be one of them is Parkinson's. There can also be actually diseases or cerebrovascular or encephalitis diseases that can occur that can render or damage this portion of the brain and not enable the neurons to be able to properly replicate and kill it off, so then in turn then you don't have the dopamine release. So dopamine, a new vocabulary word for the day. When we're talking about diet, you know, it's kind of funny because it seems like the same kind of diet applies to most disorders. But with Parkinson's, we do have to watch the protein levels, particularly meat proteins. If you have Parkinson's or you think you may have it, you know, somewhere progressively developing, boy, I would eat no red meat, no pork, none of that. For some reason, the inflammatory nature of meat proteins and saturated fat proteins cause a lot of problems with Parkinson's patients. As a matter of fact, if you're eating even just the plant-based proteins, or in this case as well, fish, they want you to primarily do it at dinner time. For some reason, excessive proteins earlier in the day can trigger more of the reaction and the lack of release of dopamine as well, too. It's kind of funny. There were some studies out there that said people who eat a lot of beans, particularly, you know, vegetarians eat a lot of beans, they actually lower the risk of Parkinson's. And we don't know particularly why, but whatever they're producing, eat your beans. They're actually very good in fiber and protein, and they have a low glycemic index as well. 50% to 75% of organic raw fruits and vegetables. And I have customers who tell me, how am I ever going to chew all of this? My teeth aren't the best, not the greatest. Now, I know at our store, we make fruit smoothies. And fruit and vegetable smoothies. So if you do have this disorder, you can make smoothies where you're adding in an apple and your broccoli and your spinach and that kind of stuff. And you make the smoothies taste very, very good. I know we have a smoothie called Don't Tell the Kids Smoothie. And basically it has 2.5 servings of veggies. So there's ways you can get raw fruits and vegetables without sitting there and eating them raw. But it is recommended, organic raw fruits and vegetables. They're very enzyme rich and nutritionally rich as well, too. And there's no chemical pesticides or herbicides, which most likely contributed majorly to the Parkinson's disorder or disease. Cold pressed oils, so things like flaxseed, sesame oil, fish oils, those essential fatty acids that we can get in diet to some extent or supplementation help reduce inflammation. They help the nerves better communicate. Anytime you reduce inflammation, everything the body, circulatory, neuron-wise, nerve-wise, is going to communicate better. Fresh vegetable juices, that smoothie thing that I just talked to you about. Now, I'm not talking about going down and buying, and I'm going to say this, V8 down at your local grocery store, because there's tons of chemical pesticides in V8, tons. And in are the generic sources as well. If you're going to do vegetable juices, they need to be organic. Live cultured milk products, once again, preferably organic because you have pesticides and chemicals going in those milk products. Glass of water every 2 hours. My gosh, how many times have I said, you've got to drink your water in order to detox and carry the chemicals out of the body and carry the good nutrients into the cells. If you don't drink enough water, problematic. We've already mentioned that we need to avoid all animal meats, but artificial sweeteners, alcohol, caffeine, sugar. Sugar is like battery acid to the vascular system and the neurons. You can watch kids. I know I can watch my 12-year-old son. When he does excessive sugar, he's all over the place. His neurons in his brain are misfiring from every which angle. And remember, alcohol is sugar. So anything that overstimulates the brain, being alcohol, sugars, or caffeine, or dyes, or chemicals, are going to cause issues with nerve disorders and nerve issues. Now with Parkinson's also too, as in with any type of program where a person's trying to maintain a proper weight level, you want to eat small meals throughout the day. And you're going to have to adjust those based upon what you know your caloric intake is. Like for me, I run very well off our 1,800 calories a day. I'm fairly active, but if I do 2200 and I do more cardio, I'm fine. So depending on your activity level and whether you're spreading your meals, if you can do 5 small meals throughout the day when you have Parkinson's, with most of the protein being concentrated on the last 2 meals of the day, that's a right on. Now, supplements. Wow, there is so much research out there, and a lot of it is major research. This shows the absolute suppression of some of the symptoms, a lot of which actually reduce some of the side effects of the standard medications, because standardly the medications that they'll give you are going to attempt to increase your dopamine levels, but oftentimes they don't. They increase dopamine to an excessive level, and you'll end up with side effects because the brain just doesn't receive these particular drugs very well. But there's certain supplements that can help the medications work better. But that notwithstanding, I'm going to talk about it mostly from a standpoint of supplements taken just solely on their own as well too. CoQ10, 1,200 milligrams, and it needs to be this source. Now I have a local chiropractor who's recommending that people go in, I'm going to say this, to Costco to get their CoQ10. Now, it's not a matter of Costco, but it's the matter of type of CoQ10 that places like drugstores and all carry, which is a synthetic form of CoQ10. It doesn't work. It's worthless. It's useless. So you need to look for this form of CoQ10, and then there are other ones, Q-absorb, and some other ones that even have a better absorption but it really seriously reduced in all the studies the progression of early stage Parkinson's disease. So I look into that. Creatine. And it's kind of funny, I have more coaches say, their parents, don't give the kids creatine, you know, for sports and that type of thing, because creatine increases endurance output. But what it does do is it increases the ATP function within the cells, and it also increases mitochondria action and protects the neurons in the brain. So what most of the studies were done on Parkinson's with creatine was about 10 grams, which is 2 teaspoons per day. 5 to 10 teaspoons is usually very well tolerated, and it needs to be an American source, not creatinine out of China. So you better know where you're getting your creatine from. You know, go to your local large outlet to buy creatine. You just don't. You don't want a Chinese source of it because you're going to get creatinine, which is not creatine. Know your sources of where you're getting things from. The omega-3s. Now, there were some fantastic Japanese studies, particularly on DHA, which is a component primarily found in fish, or there's also certain types of algae, if you're vegetarian, that DHA is really rich in. And literally, it prevented neuronal program death. It slowed the progression of the death of the dopamine levels of these particular neurons in the brain tissues. Because these things will die off very quickly, and then the dopamine levels fall. If you can slow the progression of the die-off, oh man, then your dopamine levels will rise naturally without having an overdose of the drug or medication. So something to look into and relatively inexpensive. B-complex, particularly those rich in B6, B12, and folates. And I've mentioned a drug down here that if you take it 12 hours apart, literally what it did is this drug comes with a lot of side effects. So there's living scores that they give to Parkinson's patients on how well their quality of life is. And when this combination was taken with this drug, but 12 hours apart, it really enhanced how the utilization of the medication without using overdoses of the medication. NADH, been around for a long time, increases or reduces the symptom, but increases dopamine and does pass the blood-brain barrier to increase dopamine output. Ester C, believe it or not, I mean, here's vitamin C again, and I hear more doctors saying, vitamin C is worthless. Vitamin C, especially in a mineral ascorbate form, actually counteracted some of the side effects of the medications that are given for Parkinson's. So, you know, spread it out through the day. Don't do ascorbic acid. Do the mineral ascorbate forms of C. They're very helpful to counteract the side effects. Natural vitamin E. We found everything I'm listing on here all has clinical studies that you can go back and you can research. Very important because you have a lot of oxidative damage in these patients, and it reduces oxidation and increases oxygenation to the brain as well. Acetyl-L-carnitine, Italian and Mount Sinai research. It's amazing how some of these universities and other countries are doing things simultaneously. But very neuroprotective agent in the brain, and it's very good. Most of the studies supported in combination with alpha-lipoic acid, not taken at the same time, because acetyl-L-carnitine is an empty stomach and alpha-lipoic acid is with food. But that very antioxidant on the brain and protective as a preventative for the brain as well, actually for Alzheimer's as well too. Super greens, green tea, interesting, also helps protect the brain from the die-off and death of these dopamine cells. A preventative as well as using it if you do have it. Theanine, again, theanine is an amino acid. There's Korean studies that support that theanine, which is found in green tea, but in heavier concentrations by itself, prevented that death of those cells. Resveratrol, which came out really heavy as an anti-aging agent. I mean, for people like you and me. Also protected mitochondria action. I'll tell you, if I had Parkinson's, I would do everything on this list because I wouldn't care, because the disorder is debilitating. And hopefully maybe Michael J. Fox somebody will send him a copy of this, because I have to tell you, these are all very helpful. Calcium, magnesium, relaxes the muscles. The nerves need it for proper function, and a lot of people have neurological issues because they have that lack of CalMag. And then to help with sleep and increase serotonin, 5-HTP. I know I went through that real quick. If you have any further questions, you can always stop by at the vitamin and herb stores, and we can give you a copy of this. We're going to be moving on next to the fitness portion of our show. Thank you. Hi, welcome to the fitness portion of our show. And today we're going to be working on a coordination move. When we're younger or as we grow older, and sometimes in between, we lose coordination of our muscles in grasping and motion and movement. So I want to show you a modern day yoga move that I think may be able to help you. Now, if you do this exercise and you have problems, then that means you need to practice it, because you'll reach for things and grab it and not have that hand-eye coordination, and this exercise can help. So we're going to be moving on here, and we're going to start on a plano view, and we're leaving a lot of room here so you can kind of see this exercise. But what we're going to do is we're going to reach the ball over 90 degrees, and then we're going to grab it with this hand, grab it like this. And what we're doing is we're using a little bit of grab, hand-eye, and muscle coordination. We're going to go down. And what we do is we alternate the hands, keeping it in that 180, 360 degree, side to side, up and down. Now you can mix it up if you want, but what we're basically trying to do with this exercise is get you some hand-eye coordination. If this is a problem, mind you, just grab a small ball, doesn't have to be as big as this one. Practice that exercise and keep on practicing, and your brain will take over and start to work on what you lost from before. Next, we're going to be moving on to the research portion of our show. Thank you. Hi, welcome to the research portion of our show, and with us today is Ralph. Ralph?
Thank you very much for that intro. And as far as something called IBS, well, there appears to be hope that there may be a very efficient treatment for IBS. And this came out of the Journal of Gut. Yeah, that's the name of the journal. All right, on August 2nd, what they discovered, I should say released, is one simple thing. They were trying to figure out why the intestinal tract of people with IBS is so permeable. Well, they came across one simple conclusion, that the body or the intestinal tract is having a difficult time manufacturing the amino acid glutamine, which glutamine, of course, is used to repair the mucin lining, often of the gut and the stomach. But, however, they now postulate that by adding glutamine, and just glutamine by itself, to individuals with IBS, that they may be able to alleviate a great portion of the misery and suffering from those individuals, as opposed to taking the traditional narcotics and tricyclic antidepressants, which don't do anything for IBS. They just basically relieve some of the symptoms associated with IBS. So look in the horizon for glutamine as far as being taken by itself. It can be found in many health food stores as it is. relatively non-toxic, and so maybe something you may want to consider trying. And outside of that, now we go back to high fructose corn syrup. And this came out of the peer-reviewed Journal of Cancer Research. Well, you often hear the statements of, well, you ever heard about high fructose corn syrup? And the person responds by, what do you mean by problems with high fructose corn syrup? Well, here's one which is real important. Keep in mind, from 1970 to now, there has been a 1,000% increase in high fructose corn syrup. In addition to that, 40% of all of our foods are now sweetened with high fructose corn syrup. What's the problem with high fructose corn syrup? Cancer. Why? Well, especially pancreatic cancer. And this is what they discovered. Originally, what they had thought is sugar and high fructose corn syrup were identical, and cancer cells basically did not differentiate between the two. That was wrong. They found out, quote unquote, in the case of fructose, the pancreatic cancer cells use the sugar in a trans-ketolase-driven non-oxidative pentose phosphate pathway to generate nucleic acids, the building blocks of RNA, DNA, which the cancer cells need to divide and proliferate. And this may be with all cancers. So when some doctor or medical professional comes up to you and says your diet has nothing to do with cancer, well, you know what? Tell them to go back and do their homework again. Things have changed since they've been out of medical school. And this doctor also said, quote, this is Dr. Haney, and this was done from UCLA's Johnson Comprehensive Cancer Center. They said that there may have to be campaigns now to get people off a high fructose corn syrup, especially if they're concerned about their health. Even more so, if not equivalent to that of smoking. So something to think about. You know anybody with cancer, get them off that high fructose corn syrup immediately. And that could be a huge boom. It may make the difference between survival or not. And talking about survival or not, the FDA moves to withdraw an unproven blood pressure drug. There's a term I use often. It's called harvesting agony. And what harvesting agony means is when you're making money off of someone else's misery without looking to improve their condition. Well, this came up to a drug that was approved in 1996 called proanamine. Now, what's the problem with this drug that's been on the market for over 14 years? Very simple. It was never proven to do anything to alleviate the symptoms of what it was prescribed for. What was it prescribed for? People with low blood pressure. It's supposed to help them increase their blood pressure. Well, the company never conducted a mandatory follow-up study to actually prove the long-term benefits of the drug, period. When they tried to contact the manufacturer, remember there's more than one manufacturer now, but the primary one was Shire, based in Dublin, no phone calls were returned. There are 5 generic versions of this proanamine on top of that. And there's only 100,000 U.S. patients on this medication, which has never been proven to do anything. So that's something to keep in mind. That's what I mean by harvesting agony. And for this is an interesting point too, and this will come up a little bit later on. For nearly 20 years, the FDA granted accelerated approval of drugs based on what's called on surrogate endpoints, meaning they actually don't finish the study, or initial measures that suggest the drug may make real improvements. For example, with cancer drugs, if you shrink a tumor, they can get approved, even though it doesn't mean it increases life expectancy at all. This drug's only made $257 million for the manufacturers, yet has not been shown to do one single thing. Well, it's still on the market, so think about that. And now I have to really thank Time Magazine. Time Magazine came up with a really good article on another drug that makes much more money than the last one I talked to, called Avandia. Avandia now makes for GlaxoSmithKline about $3 billion a year. One of the most blockbuster diabetic drugs that are on the market. The problem with Avandia is not the fact that it's a drug for diabetes itself, it's the fact the side effects of Avandia are pretty heavy. And the problem with that is there are other comparable drugs or prescription drugs on the market that don't have anywhere near the side effects, yet Avandia remains on the market. In fact, let's go back to May 14, 2007. They discovered at that time that Avandia increased the risk of heart disease, failure, complications by 43% compared over other comparable medications on the market. But yet, somehow, 8 days ahead of time, that day in 2007, they found ways to basically confuse the evidence. Basically just how to describe the FDA. And they were presented what's called the mixed argument. But then in 2007, they said, quote, the FDA allowed Avandia to stay on the market, a move worth billions to GlaxoSmithKline, and, quote from the article, put millions of patients at risk. Remember, there are healthy alternatives out there. This is what I mean by harvesting agony. And this gives you a little bit of history about the FDA. The FDA served the public insatiable hunger for new medicines. And this is something people don't know. Yet the agency does not have the responsibility to perform any safety testing on its own. In fact, it relies on the drug companies to perform all pre-market testing on their drugs for safety and efficacy. And it relies on the industry for user fees. In fact, 65% of its budget for the FDA is made from the drug companies. That's kind of like the police department relying on the mafia for its salary and saying there's not going to be any conflict of interest. In fact, over the past 3 years, coming to clinical trials, the FDA has only inspected less than 1% of all the sites where clinical trials are conducted, meaning you virtually can say about anything at 99.9% certainty, chances are you won't be caught. But that's not even the top of it. What happened was equally alarming is the FDA knew of the dangers before it even informed the public of any heart damage in 2007. In fact, what they found out is the FDA investigating whether GlaxoSmithKline broke the law, failing to inform the agency of Avandia's heart risk. The Deputy FDA Commissioner, Dr. Joshua Sherton, tells Time, at least the story of Avandia shows how drug companies use uncertainty and confusion and put the public at risk to get a drug on market. Oh, it gets bad. In fact, in 1999, a Dr. Takeda Yamada covered up the fact that Avandia may cause heart problems and said basically it had a neutral lipid profile. What basically, though, is the FDA scientists at that time in 1999 lied and didn't want to prove the drug. But somehow, in 1999, even though there were members on the commission that had conflicts of interest, Avandia got approved without any further testing. When Time magazine contacted the FDA to see these conflict of interest sheets that the FDA supposedly keeps on hand about its commissioners, the FDA told Time, quote unquote, declined to release them and said none of these conflicts involved any sort of interest in regards to Smith Beecham at that time. Then they said, quote, came to horse trading. After outside experts weighed in on the new drug, before it received final approval from the agency, the FDA and the drug maker negotiated which tests the company perform on large numbers of people before taking it to the open market, meaning they didn't want to discover the problem, so the FDA helped GlaxoSmithKline cover up the problem. In fact, basically in speeches in 1999 when they tried to stop it, Avandia increased your cholesterol levels by 4-fold. Not just double, not triple, but 4-fold. There's more to the story. I really recommend you research your Time magazine, but that's all I have time for right now. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Do your research. Thank you for joining our show. Bye.